Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Crain. I'm the owner of Osceola Press Printing and Signs. I also chair the Small Business Council for the Kissimmee Osceola County Chamber of Commerce. The economy is starting to get reopened this week, being safe, smart, and step-by-step. Small businesses are getting back to work, and this is kind of a new environment we're in. Today's streaming presentation is really focused towards the small businesses, things we need to know, things we maybe need to do to protect ourselves as small business owners as we get back to business. So this morning, we're going to be welcoming Kristin Ahr. She's a partner with Nelson, Mullins, Broad, and Cassel. They are also a trustee for the Chamber of Commerce here in Kissimmee. So without further ado, I would like to turn the show over to Kristin.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me. And I would like to present some information that would be helpful to the small businesses of the Chamber, because as we all know, and we've really gotten to understand more clearly, that small businesses are the lifeblood of the American economy, and especially the Florida economy. So today we're going to talk about considerations for reopening your business in the employment context. And we do have a presentation prepared. So what I will present to you is a brief overview of things you should be considering as an employer and as a small business person when you do reopen, to create what we call a virus-conscious workspace. So the next slide is discussing what we at Nelson Mullins have created to be a safe office and workplace or wellness policy. We have come up with strategies and put our heads together as to all types of ideas that every employer, including small businesses from 2 employees to 200, 2,000, under these circumstances, you should have a written plan. So some of the things that I will talk about will be things that you should include in your written plan. And, you know, obviously a half an hour doesn't give me enough time to get into the details, but you can reach out to me and I would be happy to speak to you further. The next slide discusses implementing new operating procedures. So we're going to have a new workspace. It's going to be this virus-conscious workspace in which the owners of the small businesses should look at what they do. And it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. You've got to look at your small business. What are your exposure risks to your employees, to yourself? You have to understand and comprehend what the symptoms of COVID are so that you could recognize if one of your employees is not feeling well, and you have to know what to do if that does occur. You have to understand and have a plan in place for sanitizing your workplace before you reopen to the public, reopen to your remote working employees, and how you keep that clean and how you implement hygiene measures, because the government has said consistently from the beginning of this, it's social distancing and washing your hands. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you do social distancing in the workplace. It's going to depend on your infrastructure in the type of business that you have, but there are creative ways. And if you start thinking, and I'm sure many of you have been thinking about this through the days and the long nights that we've been stuck inside, but now that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, some of those ideas that you have, we can discuss those, and you've probably come up with better ideas than we have for your particular business. And the other topic that has always been a big concern is PPE, personal protective equipment. We've had issues with supply chains, availability, things of that nature. We have to decide as an employer whether or not you're going to provide it or whether your employees are going to provide it. Are you required to provide it? Then we get to emergency procedures. What do you do if all of a sudden you do determine that one of your workers does have the temperature, is exhibiting symptoms, what are the protocols, and what plan should you have in place? And then finally, discuss things of ordinary HR, attendance. What if someone calls in sick? What if someone is afraid to come to work? So those are some of the things that we want you to start thinking about and put in a written plan and start implementing. So the next slide deals with some of the early considerations: access, including screening of employees, visitors, and vendors. So the workplace policy, the best practices are to have testing and screening, including temperature checks. Ordinarily, under certain circumstances, temperature checks would be considered a prohibited medical examination, but you can have temperature checks under the COVID situation. So we want to make sure that you have a designated person, management designee, who does those temperature checks, whether it be daily or weekly. Just keep track of your people, because a safe workplace is a productive workplace, which again impacts profitability. Then the question of information gathering. We want to make sure that we do accurate reporting with regard to your community. They want to do contact tracing, what your obligations are. As yet, those are unclear because some of the back to work guidelines are not specific enough. But you want to make sure that when you do the information gathering, if someone does test positive, they fell sick at work, you put them in the isolation facility that we can talk about later. They do report back that they have tested positive. You want to make sure as soon as you possibly can, who did that employee come into contact with? Who were they within 6 feet with? And I know it sounds like something that you heard in a book by Orwell, but these things are very important to stop the spread, slow the spread, and make sure that we could keep your businesses open and keep them up and running. And some of those things, let's start talking about when you enter the facility. Most businesses have a one-way in and then maybe a back door. You might want to have employees enter through a different entrance to your screening, then put them to work as they put on their masks or their other protective equipment. It all depends on your business. It's going to seem a little strange at first to have retailers be wearing masks, and it will start to get normal. I know that it depends on your personal preference as to whether or not you feel like you should wear a mask or you shouldn't. I understand that Osceola County is requiring masks to be worn, but just make sure that your goal is prompt identification and isolation of potentially infectious people is a critical step in protecting your workers, your businesses, your customers, because you don't want to be on that headline as I went to Joe's sub shop and got COVID, visitors and others at the workplace. So we just want to make sure that you are limiting vendors only to necessary people, bringing back people in comprehensive stages, taking into consideration the special risks of your employees and trying to accommodate them as economically practical. The next slide talks about permitted questions. So I've provided for you the original list of permitted questions. Ordinarily, the employer is not allowed to ask a lot of personal questions unless someone does have a disability and you engage in the interactive process. But on this slide here, it does allow you to ask specific questions that deal with the new coronavirus so that you can not only protect and educate those employees and those individuals, but also to make sure that you have a safe and well workplace. So this is human capital here, and these are individuals, that we work with every day. So we want to make sure that we take care of them And it seems intrusive, but everyone will get used to it, because I understand that a significant part of the population does want to get back to work, does want to feel normal again. And to the extent that these questions are directed to get everybody back to work on a safe playing field, they are permitted, and you may go ahead and ask them. If they do answer in the affirmative, you are allowed to send them home. And if they do exhibit any of the signs and symptoms that the CDC, and I can provide those for you later on your website, and that'll bring us into the next slide. The CDC and OSHA are your best go-tos for guidance in how to clean, how to protect your workspace, and how to slow the spread in your community. They also have wonderful resources for signs of how to wash your hands, how to stay safe. So with that, I would say that that would be the bedrock of your back to work plan and your safe office and wellness plan. Another very important thing before you bring your workers back is to train all of the staff in the new guidelines. A lot of small businesses have challenged themselves and really done well with a remote workplace. So my suggestion would be is to create a video and email it to all of your employees before they return to work, and tell them, we're excited to have you come back, or some of you have already been back, and this is what it's going to look like. And these are the things, the protocols and the schedules that we're going to have in place, so that you don't spend that first day doing all the training, so that they can be prepared to get ready to start working again, start interacting with again, and being productive. Again, social distancing and hand washing are the bedrock of a safe workplace. So with social distancing, currently the standard is 6 feet apart. That may be impossible for some of your businesses, so it's time to start getting creative with your workspace and figuring out, how am I going to keep my people safe and 6 feet apart? Maybe impossible, but with the masks and frequent hand washing and extended social distancing, you will be able to do it, and it will start to feel normal. Again, also, you want to make sure that there's limited use of shared equipment. You might want to designate one person to the copy room, one person to the reception desk, so that you're not having employees switch off on phones, computers, other office equipment. Before you do reopen, and if there is some type of exposure, you want to have a deep clean. The CDC has a link to the EPA acceptable equipment, but soap and water works just as fine as alcohol, hand sanitizer, and the like. So it's not going to be as expensive or as intrusive. The concerns for everyone are making sure that you do it right the first time and rolling it out so that it's effective and that everyone feels comfortable, including your employees. So the next slide talks again about this virus conscious workspace. So every owner of a small business knows every square inch of their business. So take a look at your physical setup. If you had desks that were facing each other, you might want to have them facing apart against the walls. If you had traffic flow that was just, you've seen it at Publix, where certain aisles are this way and certain aisles go this way, start thinking about your specific space and modify your physical structure and your infrastructure so that it gives you the best possible distinction between people for distance. Another thing we've been thinking about is staggered schedules, and that is for a number of reasons. So if you usually had everyone come in, say at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's an elevator, you might want to consider having some people start at 7:30, some people start at 8, some people start at 30 so that there's not an overflow on elevators or the doors, the entrance. There's not an overflow in the testing and temperature taking, but also to minimize the density, because density is the virus's greatest weapon. So you also might want to think about having certain people work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, other people work Tuesday, Thursday, and staggering those schedules so that you can reduce the amount of people that are physically present in the workplace at any given time. And all of the guidance says, if you can, continue the remote working and telecommuting if it's feasible for you, if it's practicable for you. With regard to visitors, obviously we want as many customers that we can to visit the workplace, but let's try to, for at least with phase 1 and phase 2, limit it to only business necessities. So someone's husband or wife coming to visit the office just to say hi or drop off a lunch really shouldn't be permitted at this point. And only third-party vendors that you need to come and fix your copier, or people that you usually have come in, maybe trying to give lunch to people or dropping off food. Let's try to keep the people coming to a minimum and the interaction with other people. So the next slide is PPE. I'm not sure what each of your individual businesses have encountered with respect to PPE. And it is depending on the level of risk, but obviously we know that masks are required in Osceola County for I don't know how long. Who's going to provide those masks? Are you having problems with the supply chain? Get together as a chamber and talk about resources and how you can make sure that you have enough PPE on hand to protect your employees, or some employees want to bring their own or make them. The resistance is a significant degree of the population, but I believe that most people want to show that they care about other people not getting it, and making your customers and your guests feel as welcome as your employees do. But we also have that employer obligation to provide a safe workplace. I just noted this morning that OSHA has received 1,063 complaints about workplace safety issues since the COVID epidemic has spread. So 1,063 in just the last couple of months, as opposed to they usually have 9,000 in a year. So we will be seeing that number go up to OSHA workplace safety complaints. So make sure you're not on that list, and we can talk about that at a different time if that's something that you're concerned about. The next slide is, again, we talked about the training. Go ahead and have a written plan in place. Get your managers up to speed and engage them as to how they believe that they can follow these sorts of protocols, the new procedures, the required attendance policies, and all the new company guidelines. Again, I would suggest creating a video or a written plan, circulating it to people, and then on the first day everyone comes back, or as they come back, tell them, here's what we've done to protect you. It goes a long way for human resources purposes, and just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable coming back to work as we do that in stages. So when you do the training, make sure that you keep a written log of every employee who has done the training and have them sign off on either the policy or the training review. Next is leave management, and having a 30-minute webinar on the next slide is going to be very difficult to get into because it is state and local specific. There are different leaves that you may have in terms of paid time off, FMLA. the new legislation, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, applies to employers under 500, which would be most people on this webinar, having that emergency paid leave. What are the limits of those? What if providing that leave would just be economically impossible for you? There are some protocols that you could be excused from some of those requirements. So that's something that the chamber and I are talking about getting out to you in another webinar, and to make sure that once we do reopen, that you're following all of those, because we would hate to have some sort of employee claim when you really did take all this and do your best to get it to be a safe workspace, and then maybe tripped up on one of the leave policies, or maybe asked one of the wrong questions and it took somebody the wrong way. So let's revisit this question. I think it's very important. And the next slide is the return to work protocol. Again, I can't tell you enough how wonderful the state and federal governmental authorities have been. The OSHA website, the CDC website, the EEOC website, state and local websites have been fantastic at rolling out information and rolling out things that you can print and maybe laminate and put those into your workplace, into the bathrooms, into your wash stations. But let's talk a little bit about the self-isolation and quarantine. And one of those ideas is, if someone tests positive, to have an isolation room set up, kind of like the concept where a breastfeeding mother has a private space to do a nursing room private. So if someone is experiencing symptoms, let's put them in a designated facility until we can make sure that they have transportation to either get home or to the local healthcare facility to get tested, and deep clean that obviously afterwards, and then work with the other employees that may have come into contact with them, so that we can ensure that a healthy workplace is a productive workplace. And then finally, the last slide is dealing with wage and hour matters. So these are really big plaintiffs' litigation hotspots for all businesses. So hourly workers, let's just assume for the sake of argument, the time of taking their temperatures and the time of putting on their PPE is compensable time. Let's just assume that ruling will come down the pike, and that they can clock in, or you can reverse the time that it took, or give them each 10 minutes to do that, or however long it took. So I don't want you to get into a situation where you started work and someone works 40 hours on the clock, and then they say, but I spent a half an hour every day that was not paid getting ready for work. That is something that I think it's a good policy to have that as paid time. And I don't want you to be calling me 6 months, a year from now and say, I have people suing me for overtime, because that is not a place that small businesses need to be once we're trying to rebuild the economy, get our money back, and start serving the people that we serve so well. And then for exempt employees such as managers, we have to talk about that at a later time, because it really is a very detailed conversation that you should consult with a lawyer on those types of things. So with that, I believe my presentation is done. The next slide is questions. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions. I see some, but maybe you can help me read.
So Kristin, we do have some questions.
Great.
One of our viewers has asked, if a business is contact traced to where an individual allegedly caught the virus, what can the business do to protect themselves and from being sued? Great
question. One of the things that you can do to protect yourself is to have this written plan that I'm talking about. And we have had a significant number of lawyers and thought leaders create these working plans, these written plans, follow a written plan, and also follow the CDC guidance and the government guidance. If you are following all the hygiene and social distancing policies, you will likely be exempt. Now, I will tell you that some states have some states like North Carolina, for example, or South Carolina, have legal immunity in place. I do know that that is being considered for Florida. It just depends on whether the legislature will create some sort of absolute immunity or whether the government in Washington will create immunities. But follow the guidelines and you will likely be safe. So are there any other questions?
Yeah, there is actually. I have a question for you. Part of your presentation referenced information gathering and reporting. So if, for instance, I have an employee who comes into work and find out he has a temperature or whatever the case might be, I'm gathering this information, but who am I reporting it to? What are my requirements as an employer?
That depends on your local Department of Health, State Department of Health, and then the State Department of Health reports to the CDC. So I would, that is something that for this particular chamber, I believe that you would report it to your county, and then they will report it to the State Department of Health. Because the information that we gather is not so that it's to pinpoint that you did something wrong, it's to slow the spread. So reporting to whomever you can and the information that you provide is a safety measure for your community. It's being a good member of your community, and it seems that it's telling on people, or that we would create, some sort of brand distinction that you did it. There's a way to confidentially do it. And speaking of confidential, the employees who do test positive and the employees who do have a temperature, those checks are to remain confidential. So you do not keep that information in their regular employment file. That should be kept in a separate file. So that's, again, I gave you a broad brush this morning. There's so many details that we could get into, but I would encourage any one of your members that has a question to reach out to me or to their employment lawyer or to you guys, and to get to me, that we can work together to create protocols to get Kissimmee and Osceola County back up and running, because it is truly one of the greatest communities in our state. And I would love nothing more than to see you guys thrive and get back to work and business and creating the best part of the Sunshine State that we have. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, this presentation will be available, and we also have this information being posted to the Chamber's website. Great information. Thank you for the many, many hours I'm sure you and your firm have put together.
Oh, we've enjoyed it. It's more than legal work. It's making sure that America, this has really been tough for a lot of us, and to watch, as an employment lawyer, to watch people have to let people go who they consider family. That was hard, but I know we can get back, and I know that we can get back stronger than ever. Our will and our ingenuity and our energy is greater than ever. And so I am very excited to see what it is that you can do.
Thank you so much. Our motto is to be champions for business and community. We thank you for being a part of our chamber. We thank you for the information you presented today. I truly appreciate it.
Again, I would be happy to come back anytime you're asked. It was such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin.
Okay.